What's up, guys? It's CG Kid. So in this video, we're going to cover what is codependency. I'm not a licensed professional, so I'm collaborating with a licensed marriage and family therapist. Her name is Denise. She's the clinical director of Renewal Health Group. They're rehab facilities for drug addiction located throughout California. Amazing staff of people. I'll be sure to link to them in the description. I think this is a very important topic as codependency is very widespread and it's rarely discussed. I actually did a video on codependency a long time ago and it doesn't have that many views, but I still get tons of text about it saying that it's helped people better understand themselves. And I think this is a very engaging discussion and I hope you guys get some from it as well. I don't know, there's so many definitions out there. I like letting someone else's behavior affect you to the point that you become obsessive with controlling them. So,
yeah, I like that.
I think that I'm just trying to figure out, because I think we all identify it differently. I think any time that I need to control somebody, it could be seen as codependency. Because you can't control other people. I'm just curious, what your views are on codependency and, what you think it is.
I think that is a trait. I don't think you should label yourself as codependent if that is situational. Typically, codependent people get lost in somebody, right? Literally their joy needs to be reflected upon somebody else's joy. You know, it's kind of that, I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, you wake up and you say, how do we feel today? You know, if you're we're happy, oh great, then I'm happy. There's literally such a dependence on understanding the emotions of another person that you just take on yourself. Good, bad, it doesn't matter. So there's this loss that you get in somebody when you're codependent. You do things in spite of really your own joy, right? It's this constant desire to want to be seen, to want to be heard, to want to be valued, to want to be understood. And the problem with codependency is usually people pick somebody who likes to control. You don't usually find, you find the needy with the person that likes to control, the kind of the passive aggressive mix that is a beautiful marriage for disaster because both needs are being met in a very unhealthy way. But it works for them if they don't know what they don't know, which is that there's such a better way to live, which is independently. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, of course, I don't diagnose people, but you'll be hanging out with, and doesn't always happen, you'll be hanging out with, a guy and his girlfriend, and they get in a fight over something, really small.
Yes.
Right in front of you, and I always wondered in the back of my mind, what are they like when I'm not here?
Yeah.
So I feel like codependency is just one of those things there's not very much awareness on. I think from what you're saying, I don't know if you have to be completely lost in somebody to consider yourself codependent. I think it's very subjective to the individual.
Okay.
In other words, if I think I'm maybe only lost 40%, but that's still enough for me. Your bottom's where you start digging.
Agreed.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah. 40% is pretty significant, right? For sure. I think you nailed it earlier. I think people think they can control people, places, and things. And arguments and silly fights and things like that happen in an attempt to try to control people, places, and things. And then you're met with somebody not being controlled, and then you get mad because you didn't get what you wanted when you wanted it, right? Because that person had a different opinion, which is allowed and okay, but you don't like it because you wanted it your way. So that can bleed certainly, of course, into codependency, but that's also a whole different issue of its own, that you are confused that you're entitled to putting opinions on somebody else or wanting them to do what you want when you want them to, and kind of disrespecting the fact that you're individuals and finding acceptance in that. And actually that's a beautiful thing. You don't always get it your way. That's just acceptance, right?
Yeah.
As a whole.
So what you're saying is it could just be entitlement and it comes across that way.
I think so.
They actually don't really care about the relationship. They more care about you agreeing with them and
certainly in that moment.
Yeah.
Certainly in that moment, because there's a loss of respect, right? Because when you respect, it's an understanding that, oh, okay, all right, you don't want to do that. Let's compromise or let's have a discussion rather than an argument about something trivial.
Absolutely. What's I know interdependency is like the opposite of codependency. What does that like look like? It's just like in a relationship. Let me throw a hypothetical situation at you. My girlfriend is texting a guy too much and it's making me feel upset. What's the interdependent way and codependent way of handling that situation?
That's a good question. An interdependent person is somebody who would, there's extremes, right? There's always a continuum, right? There's codependency on one end and let's call interdependence on the other end. And in the middle is healthy communication, healthy respect, all of that. So whatever you do on each side of those things, it's extreme. So an interdependent person, I actually don't really know how to answer that. I'm not sure if you would just decide like, yeah, I'm done. Like there's no room for discussion to have a conversation about your thoughts and feelings. Like it's just this immediate protection of self. And I don't actually need you enough or choose you enough to even have a conversation.
You're talking like it would be like ghosting somebody.
Ghosting someone, yeah.
Like basically blocking them everywhere and not telling them the reason why.
Right.
It would be how a very extremist.
Extreme, right? Because you're protecting yourself, and so the way you protect yourself is I'm just okay. That hurt. I'm done, and I'm out. Right.
Without any warning.
Without any warning.
That interdependent person might present themselves in a different way. Say on like the first couple dates.
Of course.
They present themselves in a way like, yeah, we'll work through stuff. I won't get upset with you if you do that. But then they like all of a sudden they flip and you're like, what is going on? Like, what did I even do?
Right.
You know, I didn't, and it could be something you've done that's like very small, but the second that they're hurt at all, they bounce because they have no dependency on other people.
Right. I mean, that's just classic attachment issues, you know, so there'd be a million reasons why somebody would feel that comfortable. Let's pretend they fell in love with this person or really cared for this person. There'd be a lot of reasons why they would be so willing to detach that quickly. And it would be because they have attachment issues, you know, probably for all kinds of reasons, from attachment issues when they were a child, issues that happened when they were like a young adult or into adulthood, you know, past stories of relationships that they got hurt on. Like we're taught these things, right? We're taught how to protect ourselves. And unless we're taught how to do it in a healthy way, we're going to do it that we think is the easiest to stop feeling pain. But it's not always the healthiest, because sometimes it's just okay to feel hurt. It's okay. It's okay to work through things, right? Mm-hmm. It's okay. But we're taught that, you know, hurt me and I'm done. And then a codependent person would probably do something quite the opposite, like get their phone, scroll through it, you know, hack into, look in their computer, like go to such an extreme of trying to figure out what's going on. Again, not healthy. You know, the healthy thing is to go to the person and say, this is really bothering me. You know, can we have a conversation about, I'm just feeling a little threatened by this relationship you're having with so-and-so.
Yeah, I feel upset.
Just be honest.
I feel upset, and without the need to control them and identify your emotions.
Yeah.
It's not your problem and not their problem.
Yeah, you're just expressing yourself. You're not telling them what they need to do. You're just telling them how you feel. Let that person decide what they're going to do. Maybe they really care what you're saying. And they'll say, I didn't know that was hurting you. Absolutely, I'll take a look at that and I'll back off or whatever. That wasn't my intention. Yeah, the other person's given the ability to make a decision. Yes. And of course, if they do enough things to make you upset, that's when you would kind of go more the interdependent route. In other words, you wouldn't let them walk all over you for the rest of your life. Right.
And with the doormat, because I feel like, what is it that they have such a low self-esteem that's the only way they feel worth is if the person they're with shows worth to them? Yeah. I've always wondered that, like, what's the kickoff? Because the person stepping on the doormat, obviously, it's to turn a person into property. Yeah. Gosh, it's really, I mean, that's why I've been struggling in the dating scene, like, lately, big time, because it seems like girls that I get with come off, and that could be that I'm too interdependent. Because I'm like, no. Yeah. The second they, like, try to control me, I'm out. Yeah. I'm, like, totally, I haven't been single 7 years now, but like it was like a 7-year thing. Yeah. and I'm totally happy being alone.
Yeah.
And I've had past trauma with like a breakup, so it would make sense why I'd be wired that way.
Sure.
Like I'm not going to invest myself in this.
Right.
You know, I like to play that, you know, I'm willing to work through everything, but at the end of the day,
You're not.
No, like I can flip it off, and I feel a little attached, but like for the most part, the next day I'm talking to someone else.
Yeah.
That's not a big deal for me. So I never even heard it expressed that way. But it's like with healthy relationships, it just obviously they're going to go unhealthy at times, and I think that's
Of course.
okay. Like Scott Peck had a definition for love. It's like extending oneself to grow with another person spiritually, and he was saying in his book, this is like the road less traveled, that we know less about the love than we do the human psyche. So he was even like, I'm going out on a limb trying to define it. But it makes sense in a relationship. If you were in a overall healthy relationship, you would have unhealthy moments, but those unhealthy moments, you're like working through them together, and you're not like abandoning the person, and you're not trying to force the person into becoming healthier, but it's like a team effort.
Yes.
And that would be like what's considered healthy. What are like
Yes.
recovery things for codependency? Like I know that like Melody Beattie's written good books. Mm-hmm. And I know there's Coda. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else out there that could help people that are struggling with like codependency?
I think sometimes just even understanding that that's what it is that they're doing. I sometimes think people don't even know because they've been doing it for so long. Just creating that level of insight and understanding of this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then, you know, we take a look back at like, well, let's take a look at when did you decide that this was an interesting relationship to you? Like, when did you decide it was attractive to be with a man who, you know, you were only with because he was your drug dealer, but yet he hurt you emotionally, he hurt you physically, but you were dependent on him. You're very dependent on him. You had this really dysfunctional relationship in the midst of addiction, which happens all the time, right? That's very, very common. And so I think just kind of unplaying that tape and creating the insight so that you can start to build the self-worth about like, why are you worth that? Like, why did you decide that that's your bar? Like, it's so low. Like, you think that you're only worth this, and kind of highlighting it in a very obvious way can be very eye-opening for people. And then as they start to be like, you know, gaining insight and things like that, you do a lot of just a lot of changing of cognitions. You know, there's a lot of distortions that people have about themselves just because of the guilt and shame, the wreckage they've caused, the story they've been a part of, all of that stuff. And so all of that is just kind of intermixed and mingled and tied together with all of it, right? And so again, I only get 3 weeks, you know, so it's kind of just like the planting of the seed so that they can understand the next steps, which is, you know, there's worksheets and things you can do like that, but ultimately it's learning how to set boundaries. Codependent people have no boundaries, none, you know, and they're just people pleasers. Mm-hmm. So it's learning how to say no. It's practicing saying no. It's practicing not saying sorry.
Or like on the controlling side, it might be practicing letting go.
Yes.
Yeah. And like, so like the recovery process might look a little different for like the doormat versus, and that's like individualized. You know, one common rationalization for the doormat, at least that I've heard a lot, is, but I love him.
Sure.
Well, what do you think like that comes from? How does somebody recover from that?
Well, you need the
same kind of thing. Or?
Well, you need to love you most, right? You can love somebody, but ultimately you need to love you more than you love somebody. And when you understand what that gift is of loving yourself, the hope is what you accept as far as bad behavior will change. So, you know, if you're willing to accept somebody who can't keep commitments, or somebody maybe who cheats, or somebody who, you know, calls you names, or, you know, somebody who tells you what to do and when to do it and you do it, all because it's feeding your need to be needed, because that's what happens. The controlling person needs somebody to need them, and then the needy person likes to feel needed, so it's this like vicious cycle, right? And so in order to interrupt that cycle, somebody, one of them, if not both of them, needs to understand that they're trying to meet a need through somebody else. That's the whole reason it's codependent. It's not a need being met by yourself, because all these needs can be met by yourself. We should have choices rather than, like, we should choose people, not need people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think when somebody's like, but I love him or I love her, well, I believe you, and that's okay. But how much, what's your threshold? Like, what is your idea of a good relationship? And sometimes when they talk about what that looks like, it doesn't match with what they're getting. And so there's this hope that, do you love you enough to say, like, all these things I want, I'm not getting, and can we kind of take a look at adjusting that? Again, it's boundaries. It's all boundaries. It's learning to be like, you know what, I don't want to do that, or I don't accept that, or I'm not going to do that. If you're the people pleaser, all you do is everything at the expense of yourself. And what really is upsetting, and because it's very manipulative to be a people pleaser. People think like, oh, people pleasers are just these great people. They're so kind. They just do anything for you. Well, the problem is the people pleaser does all this stuff, but they silently and secretly resent it. So there's this like building resentment inside. That other person has no idea you feel that way. And so there's this like disconnect. It's very unauthentic. Rather than just being like, no, I really don't want to go to the grocery store tonight. I just want to come home. Instead of, yeah, I'll go to the grocery store. And then I speak like, once again, I have to go to the grocery store. It's like there's this confusion of loss of choice.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I was reflecting, and it almost like with dating, it's like the guy needs sex to feel okay with himself, and the girl needs a boyfriend to be okay with themselves. And I think that, men tend to be heavily demonized because of, values and stuff like sex is wrong. But I think on the other side, it's like the woman can be like, all right, I'm okay with a friends with benefits situation. Mm-hmm. And in reality, they're trying to get you used to the idea of being with them. So both sides are like manipulating each other.
Sure.
And that's where dating becomes like really complicated.
Yes.
And finding something healthy.
Yes.
I mean, I've gotten to a point where I just want to be, I love myself. I identified some problems, so it's like I just want to be healthier and find somebody that wants that same thing.
Yeah.
But that's like really hard to find.
Yeah, I don't doubt that.
But then do I need it, In all honesty, I really shouldn't need it.
You don't need it, but you can want it.
Yeah.
That's different. You don't need it, but you if it's something you want, you deserve it.
Yeah.
Very different.
Do you think in a codependent relationship, like, I would imagine it's almost like drugs, like you almost have to get sober from the other person?
Yes, it's 100% like that. It's 100% like that. Yeah.
And then I imagine they could even have relapse where it's like 3 weeks goes by or a month and now they're back with that person going through it again.
Of course.
And in that time, I imagine where they're, putting distance, they're learning to love themselves, which I really think that, like any support group or like learning how to make themselves happy and learning more about codependency and the issue they're struggling with. And that's like something that, places like Renewal Health Group, they address that and stuff. Like as far as like therapy, rehabilitation.
Right.
If they don't have insurance, I imagine there's plenty of free resources like Coda.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that other thing we mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know it's like really hard because I was in a codependent relationship, and I think that breaking up with her was more impossible for me than it was to quit drugs.
Yeah.
The only difference between her and drugs, I would have never quit her, but she quit me. So then it was like, well, I'm kind of screwed. I'm kind of forced.
You had to deal.
The drugs will always be there.
Who were you in the relationship?
Oh, I was the jerk. She was the doormat.
She was the people pleaser.
Yeah, and I was very hyper controlling.
Okay.
And it was progressive, and I think that's going back to the dating world. That's another reason it gets kind of complicated, because it's progressive. Codependency is progressive. So like the first month you're with somebody, nobody starts off, I'm going to please everything you want, and I'm going to control you and get really jealous when you wear anything I don't like you wearing. It never starts off that way. Right. But I was with her 8 years, and over 8 years it got worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
And then being together that long in that cycle, you almost feel like infatuated with the person at all times.
Yeah.
And then for that to end was the worst thing I ever went through in my life. I'm just glad she had, and we talked like 2 years later, and she said it was I believe it was harder for her than it was for me. She just was the one that had the strength to do it. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So my heart really goes out to anybody in that situation. I know it could be really rough. And like bringing awareness, I think, is like a big first step, because it's one of those topics that I feel like everybody's interested in, but very few are talking about. I was looking at authors of books, and there wasn't many. It's pretty much Melody Beattie and a couple co-authored books, and that's about it.
Yeah.
But it's like a huge, I mean, I think it's one of the more interesting topics because it's so common. And I think that this is just my belief, but I think you're always going to lean towards interdependency or codependency, and the goal is a healthy balance. In other words, it's a journey and not a destination. I don't think anybody gets there and like, okay, I'm good, you know what I mean? And like you and your partner are working on getting there together.
Yeah, it's a daily grind, right? Like I think, this is just totally my opinion based off nothing, but I think that most relationships are not in the middle of health. Like you said, I agree with you. I think there's somewhere in the outliers, maybe not to the extremes, because I think it is a constant daily grind of effort that needs to be mutual to do this beautiful communication dance to try to grow together spiritually. And I think that is very, very rare. Very, very rare when you find couples like that, who just naturally have that, or have even like finally got there. I don't know, maybe after so many years of being together, people figure that out. I think it's a dance on the outsides, like, you know, this like constant battle for control, the constant battle of not wanting to be controlled, and then the fighting about that, and then, okay, what's your part? What's my part? What are we doing to fix it? And then you try that, you know, until the next time. And, you know, it's just, I just think it's a daily effort. I think it's a constant daily effort that both people have to make. I think what happens a lot in a codependent relationship is if like, let's just say you and your ex-girlfriend, for example, if one of you would have figured out how to get healthy inside that relationship, your relationship would have been tested because somebody would have changed, right? You would have either stopped being so controlling, which maybe would have made her feel insecure because there's probably a part of her that understood that's who you were, and it met a need that was very dysfunctional for her, right? Or if she decided to have some boundaries and tell you no, or that's unacceptable today, or whatever, kind of stopped people pleasing you, you would have had to figure out, does that work for you? You know, really would have tested your relationship to see, like, what was your foundation? You know, really, what was your foundation?
Mine was the abandonment issues, need for control.
Yeah.
It was just so deeply ingrained, and I never worked through it with, like, you know, a therapist, a sponsor, or anything. So it was like transferring over. And that's all, and that's what it always is. It's never, you know, nobody just shows up and is a man or a woman who's just like this controlling asshole. Like, we're not destined to be that way. Like, we're taught to do things to protect ourselves. And so it comes out in different people, different ways. And for you, it came out like that. That's all. Neither one is worse or better than the other. You know, they're both just on the side of unhealthy, to be honest. For the codependent, not the interdependent, but the codependent, the breakup, I imagine, can be way over the top. Devastating, yeah. I mean, that's where, like, you know, your world is gone. Yeah, it was the worst experience in my life. I've been through a lot of withdrawals. I've been through a lot of stuff, but there was absolutely nothing worse than that. It was like my world ended. Yes. It's the only time I was suicidal. And I've been through breakups since then. Granted, they haven't been very long relationships, but I was always afraid of how I would handle it. And now it's the opposite way. Almost like I've closed off that part of me. And now it's just like, okay. Yeah, well, because you have a trauma from it, and it's unresolved. Yeah. And so now it's just fear-based. And so now you're more interdependent, where you're like, nah, not going there. Yeah, I've even had women I've been really close to, and I just don't have those feelings towards them. And everything else would line up and naturally, like, live with them for 2 years. Yeah. Or not 2 years, like a year, like living with them. Yeah. Friends with benefits, and like no attachment at all. Yeah. And that's like something. The only time I broke down is when I realized I harmed somebody, and they broke down, and then I broke down. So I'm like that empath still. Yeah. I'm very considerate of other people. Yeah. But I just don't see, I can't see a woman as more than like just another person. That's hard for me. Yeah. I really appreciate your time. I really think this was an
Yeah.
interesting conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank
Thank you so
you.
much. Be sure to follow me on Instagram. I go live there and answer questions on a regular basis. Also, I have a podcast on Spotify that covers addiction, recovery, and various mind-altering substances. There's quite a bit of episodes on there. Be sure to follow me there as well. And I'll put Renewal Health Group's link in the description. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I love you guys. Peace out.